Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin, Daf Kaf. This is the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored by Marsha Wasserman in honor of her husband, Manny. Happy anniversary to my beloved husband, Manny. It's been an amazing 61 years of marriage. May we be blessed to continue enjoying each other's company, sharing Daf Yomi as we explore our new life in Israel. I love you. Mazal Tov. And with that, we're going to get started with our daf. So today's daf, we were ended kind of in the middle of a topic. We were talking about the approach of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir had said that someone who sells his daughter to be a slave and pasak amanat shelo yiya'ed, and then he made a condition, though, that he wasn't going to do yeyud. He wasn't going to marry her or marry off his son over time. And actually, the condition can be kept, even though we said it's matneh mashkatu b'Torah, it seems to go against. Well, how do we explain it? We said based on Chizkiah, he has a drasha le'ama, right, which is ki timkor. The pasuk says ki timkor ish et bito la'ama. If a man sells his daughter to be a slave, lo titzei kitzei ta'avadim, and she doesn't leave like the avadim do. Okay, anyway, that's not the important part. The point is le'ama, that sometimes. Okay, we're going to darshan this word lama. We're going to see it darshan in a few different ways today. That sometimes she can be sold just to be an ama, just to be a maidservant. So then from there we got into Rabbanan. What does Rabbanan do with the word lama? And then we said he needs it for the following drasha. This is all on the bottom of your Yod a bit. It comes to teach you that he can sell her to someone that a father can sell his daughter to someone who is disqualified from marrying her. Okay, that would be disqualification of a lo taseh, like a mamzer, something like that. And then we had this kavach homer, and then we said, right, we learn it in the end. You had a kavach homer thinking that you could sell her to psulim. I'm sorry, v'alodinu imukachal. So then they said, no, you can't really learn it from a kavach homer, which they rejected the kavach homer. And then in the end, they said, we learn it from the word lahama. Then we're going to start with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer has a different approach. 4 lines from the bottom of Yod a bet. He says there's a different drasha to teach that you could sell her to psulim. You don't need le'ama for that. And then we're going to have to say, if you don't need le'ama for that, then what are you going to use it for? So again, le'ama, according to Rabbi Meir, teaches us that you can say, I'm buying her on the condition that I don't betroth her down the road. I don't do ye'ud. The second opinion, and then we said, what are the rabbis who think that you can't do that? So they must learn something else from le'ama, to which we explained they learned that he can actually sell her even if the person is forbidden by a negative commandment from marrying her. Then Rabbi Eliezer says, what do you mean? That is learned from a different pasuk, which is Imra Beinei Adonai, which is the pasuk that says if he doesn't find her good in his eyes, or it's a bad idea for him to marry her, to which they say, oh, bad idea. That must mean because it's a lo taseh, it's a negative commandment, which means we already learned it from there. That's the pasuk, which by the way says, and then he doesn't betroth her. Shera'a b'nisu'in, right? That's how they explain it. So therefore, mata maloma lama, melamed shemochra likrovim. So then they say, the pasuk is to teach you that he can sell her to someone who's a relative, who's a rayot, who they would get the death penalty for. So we now have, again, there's kind of 2 approaches. Either lama comes to say, is Rabbi Meir's approach, which is le'ama comes to say that even if he makes a condition not to do yeyud. And then we have the rabbis, which split into 2. Either, according to the first opinion, Chizkiah is limuchra l'psulim, that he can even sell her to someone who's a pasul to marry her, like a mamzer or someone like that. And then we have Rabbi Eliezer, who says, no, that's learned from somewhere else. So la'ama must be about the krovim. But we're going to go through these different approaches as we go on in our daf today. Valodinu. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. You don't need lama to teach you the krovim, that he could even sell her to krovim, because, by the way, there's a whole machloket about that. Rabbi Eliezer thinks that you could sell her to someone who's a rayot, but the rabbis disagree with that. So this would only be according to Rabbi Eliezer. Valodinu. But wait, isn't it logical? In other words, if already you can sell her to someone who she can't marry anyway, because it's a negative command, what's the difference if it's negative or it's a death penalty? So now they say, what do you mean? Of course, there's a difference. You can't learn it by kal v'chomer. Since the mukhra psulim, what's the situation? If he wanted to, he actually could do yeyud because Kiddushin would be tovsim. This is something we've seen many times, that if it's a lo taseh, everyone other than Rabbi Akiva holds that the Kiddushin would actually be effective. Whereas opposed to if it's a rayot, a relative who's forbidden by the death penalty, and he betroths her, there is no Kiddushin. The Kiddushin isn't relevant. So the psulin, he could do it again. He would be going against the law, but the Kiddushin would actually be effective. There, no, you can't learn it from a kal v'chomer because you wouldn't necessarily assume that it would work for krovim since Kiddushin wouldn't be effective. Therefore, even the sale then wouldn't be effective in the first place. So therefore, you can't learn it from a kal v'chomer. That's why we need the pasuk. This is all to explain the drasha that we just saw. Okay, so that's the end of the three drashot of what we learned from Lama. Either again, a t'nai that I'm not going to do yeyud works, or psulim works, or krovim works. Okay, krovim and obviously psulim. But again, that is a subject of debate, that last one. For Rabbi Meir, no. Where would Rabbi Meir, if he learns, he goes with the first approach. Lama teaches you a t'nai, the condition. But where would he learn the psulim? We have that other pasuk. He doesn't want to do the yeyud because it's bad. What's bad? Oh, lo taseh. He's a puzzle to marry her. Well, that's where he learns psulim from. Bikrovim. Where does he learn krovim from? You would just say that Rabbi Meir must hold by the rabbis in this issue, which is he doesn't think that you can actually sell her to krovim. Okay, and that's how we resolve. That was all just to go back to Rabbi Meir. How would he learn these other two drashot? And La'ama is already busy for him, being used for his drasha. So one he would learn from the other pasuk, and the other one he doesn't learn at all because he doesn't think it's true. Okay, moving on. Tanichad. One Braita says, we're going to have two Braitot and then try to figure them out. You can sell an amah to your father, but you can't sell an amah to your son. B'tanya idach, and another Braita says, you can't sell her not to your father and not to your son. So So the one who says not to the father, not to the son, obviously holds by the rabbis who think you can't sell her to a rayot, a person who is forbidden by a rayot. That would be your father or your son, right? Your daughter can't marry her grandfather. She can't marry her brother. So that would be obvious. But why would you make this distinction? You could sell her to your father, but not to your son. Why would that work? It doesn't match either the rabbis or Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says you can sell her to krovim, and rabbis say you can't. And this is kind of 50-50. Yes, this relative, not that relative. To which they answer, La'olam kirabanan. Really, we hold like the rabbis, but modu rabanan hechadi katzad yehud, meaning you can't sell her, I'm sorry, not marry her. You can't sell her to, the whole issue is sale here, right? Not the marriage itself. You can't sell her to either one of them, really. But, she can't marry either one of them. But in the case where you sell her to your father, okay, so we have a man who sells his daughter to his father. So their relationship, the girl and the man, is grandson, grandfather, granddaughter. That obviously is forbidden. However, his son, he could actually do yeyud to the son, because a woman is allowed to marry the brother of her husband. So therefore, since the grandfather has a son that she could marry, potentially there is a potential for yeyud here. It's not completely a rayot. And that's why one opinion says, since there is some option of yeyud to his son, therefore she's allowed to. Whereas the son of this man, she can't marry the son, she can't marry his son, because that's her husband's children. She can't marry them at all. That would be a rayot. Okay, that's how we resolve those two. Now we're going into that one particular Braita that we didn't understand. Now we're going to another Braita about slaves. Jewish slaves we're talking about. Tanu Rabbanan. Im bigapo yavo, bigapo yetze. So this is a pasuk about an Eved Ivri, a man who gets sold into slavery, can't pay a debt, they sell him into slavery. It says if he goes in bigapo, he goes out bigapo. What is this gapo? So we're going to have two interpretations. Bigufo nichnas, bigufo yetzei. He goes in with his body, he goes out with his body. We don't know yet what that means. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer yechidi nichnas, yechidi yetzei. He goes in by himself, then he goes out by himself. Okay, so now we have to explain both these things. My bigufo nichnas, bigufo yetzei. What does that mean? Amarava lomar she'enu yotzei berashe ivarim ke'eved. This is to distinguish him from a Canaanite slave. A Canaanite slave, the Torah says, if you break his arm or his tooth or something, some bone or something important in his body, his leg, he goes free. You don't pay him damages, he just goes free. So now they say, in this case, he goes, if you break some important limb in his body, he doesn't go free. Okay, what does it mean really? What it means is that you, bigufo, yavo bigufo yetzei, which means he went incomplete, he goes out complete. Now it's a little weird, he broke his arm, he doesn't go out complete. The point is, you pay him damages, okay? And he doesn't go free. You just pay him. And that means that when he leaves with his body the way it was, not really the way it was, but at least the value of his body the way it was, because he got paid for the damages. So you pay him damages, not like you pay not like a Canaanite slave who doesn't get paid damages, but goes free. Okay, so it's two different tracks entirely. So now they say, that's what Rava says. Amarle Abaye. Abaye says, what are you talking about? We have a different pasuk that teaches it. There's a pasuk that says he doesn't go out the way avadim go out, meaning he doesn't go out if you break his arm. So comes Rava and says, no, I didn't learn it from there because if we learned it from there, you would have thought he doesn't go out like they do, meaning they go out with just getting their freedom without getting paid. This guy goes out, also gets freed, and also gets his money. So therefore, kamash malan, that's why you needed to learn it from the pasuk, bigufo yavo, bigufo yetzei, he goes out the same way he came in, right? Meaning he's going to go out when his years are up, and he doesn't go out at all when something happens to him. Okay, so now, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, now we have to explain, what's the yechidi nichnas yechidi yetzei? Yechidi nichnas yechidi yetzei, ma yechidi yetzei, what does that mean? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak kachi kamar. What it means is like this. Now, it's always a strange thing to think about, but in those days, this, I guess, was more common. If a man came in as an Eved Ivri, he would be given to a Shifcha Knaanit while he's enslaved. He can have relations with the Shifcha Knaanit, and it's in the best interest of the master because he wants to have more children who will be slaves. So you can mate this Eved Ivri with the Shifcha Knaanit, and he ends up bringing more children to the master, and he doesn't take them with him when he leaves. So now he's going to explain it like this. What does it mean? Yechidi nichnas yechidi yetzei. If he went in single, he leaves single. Well, what it means is yesh lo isha ubanim rabo moser lo shifcha knaanit. If he goes in with a wife and children, then he can get this. Then the master can give him, and really, what many of the commentaries explain means he can insist that he be with the shifcha knaanit while he's there. Which seems strange, okay, because we think, what do you mean? He's already married, but in those days, there were concubines, there were other things, there were second wives. So basically, this situation allows it that the master can insist. But but if he doesn't have a wife and children, then he can't give him a shifcha knaanit. Okay, again, this is or I would say not a little bit. It's very hard for us to understand in our understanding of the way the world works and the way the modern world works. This seems, you would think the opposite maybe. You can mate him if he hasn't been with another woman yet. He doesn't have another woman waiting for him, right? It would be all the more so. That would be an opportunity. Again, I don't know, an opportunity. It would be strange, but the point is here that if he doesn't have a wife, then the master can't force him to take a wife. It could be, right? It's like he's not in that frame of mind yet. Anyway, so, and then there's a whole debate when it says Yeshu Isha Ubanim, he has a wife and sons. Does that mean he has a wife or sons, right? Is it either or is it that he has to have both in order to say that they can insist on doing this? Just 1 second. I'm going to check one thing. No. Okay, fine. I don't remember what I wanted to add on this, but yeah, it's definitely a strange concept, this concept of if he's right. But the idea is that the master can't insist that he be with someone else if he's never been married before. Okay. Now we move on to Tanu Rabbanan. We're going to go to a whole thing now about if the value of the slave changes and he wants to buy himself out of slavery. Again, you get sold into slavery because you have a debt and you're supposed to be a slave for 6 years. But what if you somehow make money and have a way of buying yourself out, or you have a relative who could loan you the money and get you out? Under what circumstances can you get out? For what price? Right. So we'll see what happens if the price of slaves changes while you were, from the time you were put into slavery and the time you left. Tanu Rabbanan. Nimkar b'maneh v'hishbiach. If you were sold for 100 and then the price went up. V'amar amatayim. And now, let's say a few years into your slavery, it's now 200 and you want to buy yourself out. Do you buy yourself out for 100 or for 200? You actually still buy yourself out for the original price, 100. Shenemar, mikesef miknato. Okay, it says in the pasuk, okay, these are pasukim we're going to see. Im od rabot bashanim, if you still have a lot more years to go, lefihen yashiv gu'ulato mikesef miknato. According to those years, you will redeem yourself based on kesef miknato, the price that you were at the time of the sale. Nimkar b'matayim v'chsif, if you were sold for 200 and then the price went down, now what would you think? You still have to buy yourself out for 200 based on what we just learned, right? V'amar al maneh, and the price went down and now slaves are only worth 100 when you go to redeem yourself. Minayin she'en mechashvin lo ela maneh. What do we see? Everything is for the benefit of the eved. So now you actually only have to pay 100 because the price went down. Well, Talmud Lamal, kefi shanav. So the psukim say the following. It's actually strange psukim, and we're going to darshan them a lot now, which is, this is in Vayikra Kaf Hey Nun Aleph. Okay, you can look at this, the study guide today. I put all these, we're going to have a lot of psukim today, so I put them all in the study guide. So now in Vayikra Kaf Hey, okay, I have to go down here. Nun Aleph and Nun Bet. So let's look down here. If you have a lot of years, then it's going to go based on the way the drasha goes, the price you were sold for. If there's less left, which they understand to mean the price went down, okay, Rabot B'Shanim, they're explaining means the price went up. Then it goes based on the original price. If the price goes down, then you do the assessment according to how many years left you have. Okay, that's the drasha here. So now we're going to have a whole discussion about this. Talmud Lamar kfi shana. Okay, now that section was specifically talking about, okay, we can see it inside. That section was specifically talking about someone who is sold. Okay, if you look here, that's the section it's in. It starts in Pasuk Mem Zayin 47. And there, the whole context is a Jewish slave who is sold to a non-Jewish owner, which is not what we were talking about before. We were talking about to a Jewish owner. So now they say, now, what's unique about this? One of the options in that situation, it says also in the Psukim, is that a relative can redeem you. But how do we know if you're sold to a Jewish owner that we allow this? And the answer, Talmud Lomar, Sachir l'gzeira shava. Okay, Sachir, which Sachir is a good question. Some people say it's Pasuk Mem. It says, Sachir k'toshav imach atnadi yovel yamod imach. That's the one about the Eved Ivri. And then here it says, Kimei Sachir yihiyeh imo. That's in Pasuk Nun. Let's just go with those two. It says Sachir in both places. We're going to learn from one to the other. L'gzeira shava. That's the end of that bright. Now comes Abai and he says the following statement. Am Rabbi, harini kibbutz. So we basically have this machloket, not a machloket, sorry. We have a distinction between what we say is what's true for a Jew who's sold to a non-Jew is the same as a Jew sold to a Jew in terms of the slave always gets the upper hand, that if the price changed, he's always going to have to be able to redeem himself at the lower price. So now the Abai comes and says, Harini kiben azai b'shukei Tveria. We've seen him say this before. I'm like Ben Azai in the Shuk of Tveria, that anyone can ask him any question and he knew how to answer it. So come, bring me any questions you want. Amar le'ahume Rabbanan Labai. So somebody comes over to Abai and says the following. These psukim theoretically could have been l'chumra, could have been l'kula. So why did you go lenient on the slave instead of going more strict on the slave? You could have done it the opposite. Okay, we're going to see how you could have done this later, but right now they're going to just say you could have done it either way. Why did you go with why'd you go with the leaning on the leniencies instead of stringencies for the slave? So he says, lo salkadatach. The reason why I did this is because mida'akir rachmana legabe. Because the Torah in general is lenient with the slave, with the Jewish slave. Where do we see that? Tanya, as it says in a bright, ki tov lo imach. This is a situation where a slave decides that it's good for him where he's living and he wants to stay there longer. He wants to stay there till the Yovel year. He doesn't want to go out in 6 years. Now, what does it mean, ki tov lo imach? They say with you. What do you mean with you? Well, this is a rule to all masters, Jewish masters of their slaves. Imcha b'machal, imcha b'mishteh. He has to be with you in eating, with you in drinking. It shouldn't be that you should eat nice, white, fine bread, and he should be eating the bread with all the bran in it. Right? In those days, the bran bread was the cheaper bread. Now it's much more expensive, but those days it was cheaper. You have old aged wine, and he drinks the new wine. You sleep on nice, fine, soft wool. And he sleeps on straw. There's a great line. Anyone who acquires a Jewish slave, acquires a master, basically. You have to serve your slave as well. Okay, you have to treat him like you would treat yourself. So now they say, right, and that's what Abai says. That's why clearly the Eved, he gets the upper hand, because look, he gets the upper hand here too. But maybe that's only in terms of food and drink and sleeping so that you don't torture him. It's not difficult for him, but when it comes to him redeeming himself, maybe we should be strict with him, like Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said. Now, what is Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina how bad is it when you do something that's not even the real Isur Shvi'it, but kind of like an accessory to the Isur Shvi'it, which is Shemitah year. Adam nosev noten perot Shvi'it. If a person, now, it says that the Shemitah produce is for you to eat. So they learn from there for you to eat, but not to sell. So if you do buying and selling of produce of the Shemitah year, l'sof mocher and metaltalav, you're going to end up selling all of your possessions. Shenemal, b'shnat hayovel tashuvu isha lachuzato. Okay, here's a smichu parshiot. It says, in the Yovel year, which Yovel year, you can't work the land just like you can in the Shemitah year. Okay, this is a pasuk Vayikra Kaf Hey Yud Gimel. I think it's on the sheet. Let's just open this. 1 second. Vayikra Kaf Hey. Yeah. Okay. B'shnat Yovel. Okay, here's. Sorry. Okay, Yud Gimel. B'shnat Yovel azot tashuvu isha lachuzato. And then it says the next pasuk is. Okay, now I'm going to keep this open because we're going to use the study guide right now to see the whole long smichut parshiot of this drasha. In Vayikra Parakaf Hey, we're going to darshan all these sections and why the order is the way it is. So we start off with this mentioning of the Yovel year that everybody goes back. And then it says, if you sell something or buy something, okay, sorry, this isn't selling people. This is if you sell something to your friend or you buy something from your friend, you can't abuse the privileges and overcharge, okay, or underpay. So now they say the following. What is kano miyad mitecha? Davar hanikne miyad liyad. It's something that can be passed, meaning metaltali. So therefore they say, if you don't keep the Yovel, because the next pasuk is if you sell your stuff, it means you're going to have to sell your stuff because you're going to run out of money. Lo hirgish, what if you, okay, so now let's just go through this person's life. he does something bad. He sells his Shemitah produce, and then he ends up having to sell his possessions or many of his movable possessions, and he still doesn't change his ways. He continues to do what he was doing. L'sof mocher et sdotav, shene'amar ki amuch achicha umachar me'achuzato. So the next section, and I divided into sections on the page, and I bolded it. Ki amuch achicha umachar me'achuzato. If you sell your land, what happens? Well, someone can then redeem it, and then there's all these laws about selling a stei achuzah. Lo bat liado, so you're going to have to sell your fields. Lo bat liado, if you still didn't change your ways. Now, notice the language changed. First, it's a lo hergish, he didn't feel it. Then it says he just didn't care. Ad shemocheret beito. The next stage is ki imkor beit moshav ir choma, right? Which means you're going to sell a house in a walled city. So in the end, you're going to have to sell your house. So first your field, right? First your movables, then your field, then your house. So stop for a minute in this Braita, and they say, wait a minute, why did it say before lo hergish? Why did it start with lo hergish and then it moved to lo bat liyado? Well, this comes up a lot of times. If you did navera vishinaba and you did it again, hutralo, it becomes like heter for you. To which the Gemara says, hutralo, what do you mean? It's heter. Of course, it's not mutar. It sounds like it's saying, but simple reading of that line is, if you do a sin and you continue to do it, it becomes permitted. Of course, does it become permitted? No way. To you, it feels like it's mutar. Once you do something a few times, the first time you do a bad thing, you feel very guilty. The second time, less guilty. Once you do it a few times, you don't even care anymore. And that's why they changed it from the beginning with lo hergish, you didn't really feel it, you didn't really care. The next is lo bat liyado, which is even more. You don't even have a care about it whatsoever because you actually think it's permitted, or it feels like to you like it's permitted. Okay, back to the Braita. Next stage, because we still have more sections here. Lo bat liyado, after you had to then sell your house, you still don't change your ways. You're still buying and selling the produce of the Shemitah year. Ad shemocher et bito, you're now going to sell your daughter to be a slave. Shene'emar v'chi imkor ish et bito la'ama. Okay, this is in this is actually in a different section. It's not here. We'll get to this in a minute. Even though it doesn't appear here, because the next thing is, right, if you sell your brother, right, okay, if your brother can't afford to pay anything, right, he has no money, and you lend him money, you shouldn't charge him interest. So now they say the following. So even though selling your daughter didn't come up here, but hakamash malan nizbin inish barte velo nezeb biribita. A person would rather sell his daughter to be a slave than to take a loan on interest. Okay, because this is saying, right, if your brother has trouble, right, and he gets help from other people, right? You shouldn't charge him interest, but other people might charge him interest, like Gentiles. And they basically say, if you're strapped for money, you'd rather, this is a hard thing to hear, you'd rather sell your daughter than take a loan on interest. Why is that? Right nowadays, you would definitely not do that. But in those days, I guess people would. My time barte migra avanafka, because your daughter will slowly pay back your loan and you won't have to ever pay any extra. But hamos favazle, but this loan on interest, as long as you don't pay it back, it's going to grow and grow and grow. You're going to always have to be paying more interest. Okay, so now let's just jump next level. So you sold your daughter, then you borrowed on interest. Which is the interest. Well, if that, right, so that's the next stage after the daughter, you're going to end up buying borrowing money on interest. The next thing is you're going to sell yourself to be a slave, as it says, you're going to sell yourself. Not only you're going to sell, but to a convert. Now, we don't really mean a convert here. We're going to see in a minute what kind of convert. We don't mean a person who converted to Judaism. We mean a ger toshav. Those are the people who keep the 7 noachad laws, who live in the land. Shenemar ger toshav, because it says in the pasuk. The next section is, right? One second. No, sorry. The next section. We're moving down. Moving down to Mem Zayin. Kitasig ya ger v'toshav imachu machachicha imo v'nimkar leger toshav. You got sold to a ger toshav o le'iker mishpacha ger. Now we're going to translate all this. How do we know it's a ger toshav? Shneimar ger toshav. That's obvious. What's mishpacha ger? Ze oved kochavim. So we have three options. Number one, a ger toshav. Number two, a mishpacha ger, which is an oved kochavim, a total Gentile, not even keeping the 7 Nochai laws. And kashu omer le'ekel, when it says le'eker mishpacha ger, now moving to Amud Bet, this is someone who's sold to work in a temple of idol worship. So you're sold as a slave to a Gentile, and they make you work in an idol worshiping, in a place. So Rashi says here, "Lachtov etzim ushar tzracha v'lo l'shem Elohut." It's not that they make you worship the idols. It's just that you're chopping down trees for the idol, or whatever it is you're doing. You're doing some work that serves the idols directly. So this was a whole thing. Now, how did we get here? Okay, we got very sidetracked. This was all Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, who basically said that based on all this smichut parshiot, right? All these sections, one after the other, are all coming to tell you, if you start with Yovel, if you start selling produce in the Shemitah year, you're going to, all these things are going to happen to you. And notice one of those things was to be sold to be a slave, which means that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says anyone who's sold to be a slave, he views as someone who must have done some sort of sin, which caused him to be sold into slavery. So therefore, when Abaye said, we're going to always say the slaves, right? What's the reason for this braita? The slave, Yado ala, he always has the upper hand. Said, and we learn it from the fact that you have to feed him and treat him like yourself. They say, but maybe that's just for food and drink. But when it comes to redeeming, we should view this person as a bad person. Why should we be going toward him and making things easier for him when he's probably a criminal? That's really the question on Abaye. It was a very long-winded question, but that was where we got to our question. So Amar Le, he says now, Hatam ha'ahadre kra. Okay, that's because the pasuk repeated itself. Okay, let's explain what this means. Or the pasuk, basically Rashi says, ahadre kra, it repeated it, l'chol Yisrael l'rachem alav, to all the Jews to have pity on him. Ditani debe Rabbi Yishmael. It says in the Braita, Rabbi Yishmael, ho'il v'halach ze v'nasa komer lo'ovei kochavim, ema litchi even achar nofel. This is a very, very important line. This says, let's say this guy, who's a bad guy, okay, someone does something wrong, and he becomes even a minister to a Gentile, idol worshiper, okay, like not just a Gentile, but an idol worshiper, okay, becomes a priest there. You might say, just throw more stones on him, and he's already gone, just keep him down. Talmud lomar, listen to this pasuk. After he's sold, you should redeem him. One of his brothers should redeem him. There's two sections here which talk about redeeming, two sections of the pasuk. It repeats it to tell you, right? You shouldn't, right? Well, let's just stop for a minute. This is to tell you, don't leave him while he's down. You still need to redeem him and try to get him back. But still, that's not a good answer. Because you could say, just like we said before with the food, maybe that was just with the food. So he's not mistreated. But when it comes to redeeming, maybe not. Same thing here. Maybe a little bit different, but maybe there you have to redeem him in order not to allow him to basically become a non-Jew, okay, or an idol worshiper. But in terms of how much money he has to pay, maybe we'll still be strict with him, like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, who basically said, this guy, I think I might have said his name wrong before. I think when I said Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, just to correct all the times I said it before if I said it wrong, but Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says this guy's a criminal. So again, if it's a matter of, yes, of course you have to redeem him, but maybe the price should be higher. So basically, they reject this whole line of Abaye, and now we're going to have a different approach. I'm Rav Nachman, maybe Bar Yitzchak, maybe take out the words Bar Yitzchak. There's a whole debate here with Rav Nachman, who appears on this page. Seems like it's really Rav Nachman. Trey Kraikti, different explanation of why we darshan the psukim the way we do. And this is what I mentioned before. Ktiv im or, again, what are we trying to prove? Why, if the price goes up, he buys himself back by the lower price, and if the price goes down, he also gets redeemed by the lower current price. It's because there's two psukim that I mentioned before. Imra od rabot b'shanim, uchtiv im ma'at nishar b'shanim. Now they say the following. This pasuk makes no sense. What do you mean rabot b'shanim or ma'at b'shanim? Chiyesh shanim rabot v'yesh shanim mu'atot. What this? Longer years and shorter years? Ella doesn't mean if the years are longer or if the years are shorter. There's no such thing. Ella nitrabe kaspo mikesef mitnato. Nitma'et kaspo kefi shana. What it must mean of rabot b'shanim and ma'at b'shanim must be it must be an explanation of did the price go up or did the price go down? If the price went up, it goes kesef mikdato, the original. If the price goes, the price cost of the sale. If the price goes down, then it goes kafi shanav, however many years are left and what the price of the years is now. And that's a very good explanation. But the Gemara is still not going to be satisfied with this, right? So basically we reject Abai's whole understanding right here. Abai was all arrogant. Oh, ask me anything, I'll explain it. But in the end, his explanation gets rejected. He basically said, oh, we view it more that it's not a drasha on the pasuk. It's that we always treat the Eved better because of that pasuk about the food and the drink. And then in the end, we reject it. Because we basically say, who's to say an Eved's a good guy, right? Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina thought the Eved was a bad. Maybe the pasuk could be read otherwise. Maybe it's just if he worked 2 and there's 4 more left, and that's what it means. Im od rabot b'shanim, he has a lot more years left. Natively arba mikesef mikdato. We give him 4 then, based on the original price, right? We buy him out for 4 from the original price. Avid arba upashule tarte. But if he worked the majority and there's only a minority of it left, native tarte kafi shana. Maybe then we do it based on the price now, and then it would be ben lekula ben lechumra. Maybe it's just a matter of how many years are left. Now, Tosfot says this doesn't make so much sense because 1 second, where is it again? He basically says this doesn't make so much sense because why would it matter how many years are left? And he has an explanation. I have to remember it. 1 second, I have to look it up because it's a very good explanation. Just lose me this minute. 1 minute. Right. Tosfot Dibur Matchil Avad Daled. Okay, this is on Amud Aleph, actually. He says, Lo arikra lo bashbiach lo hachi perusha. Okay, in the middle of the Tosfot on Amud Aleph, im od rabot b'shanim da avid tartu pashalu arba, where he worked 2 and there's 4 left. Leitiv le arba mikesef v'gnato ben echsiv menishbiach mishum shehu samuch lizman knisat fem izman yitzia. Because you're closer to the entrance time, right? The time you got in, so therefore you go by the earlier price. And if you have only 2 left, since you're closer to the end, then you go toward the end price, okay? And then that would explain it a little bit better. Okay, in any case, maybe you would explain it that way. So they said, no, because im ken yichtov kra im od rabot b'shanim. Im od rabot shanim, im od ma'at nishal shanim. The pasuk said im od rabot b'shanim, v'im ma'at nishal b'shanim. In years. It didn't say if there's a lot of years, if there's few years. That would match what we just explained. And as again, we're trying to explain how we get back to darshan it this way, that it's not ben lekula ben lechumra, that depending on how many years you have left, but no, it's really, we're always going to have the Eved, right? He's always going to have the upper hand. So my bishanim, why does it add that bet in both cases? Nitrabeh kaspo bishanim mikesef mikato. If over time the price went up or down, right? That's what the bishanim. Over years, right, things changed. And that's why they're going to explain it must be that the price fluctuated and not that it didn't. By the way, the first explanation, at least according to Rashi, was that the price didn't fluctuate at all. Tosfot says the price fluctuated. It's just a matter, are we closer to the beginning, closer to the end? So Amar Rav Yosef, Darshinu Rav Nachman Lahani Kai Kasinai. Okay, he says, Rav Nachman really had this right, and therefore Rav Yosef accepts Rav Nachman's explanation. This is why people say it can't be the Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. He lived after Rav Yosef, but not the same generation. Anyway, basically, he got this right. He got the drasha right, that it's basically im ma'at nish'al bishanim and im rabot, and that's where we get it from, and not what Abai said before. That's this section. So let's just do a quick review where we were, because it's a very long daf, and I want to just get it organized. So we started with the drashot on le'ama. Is it to exclude, right? Is it to include even, right? If she's only sold for an amah and can't do yehud because he made a condition, that was Rabbi Meir, the rabbis have to either explain it like the Tanakama or like Rabbi Eliezer, that it's either to exclude psulim or it's to exclude krovim. And then we saw the psulim, there's another potential pasuk, which is Imra Aben Adoneha. Then we went on to this, the Gapo Yatzeh, does it mean the body, and it has to do with if you injure him, you have to pay him and he doesn't go free? Or is it this, that he went in by himself, he goes out by himself, meaning you can't give him shifcha knanit, or you can't force him if he hasn't been married before. Then we went to the case about I skipped. We had that you can sell to your father, according to one opinion, but not to your son, because your father can actually marry, or a man's father can marry his daughter off to one of the other brothers. And then we went to the whole thing about the price fluctuating. And then we had the whole long thing about the price fluctuating. We have, where do we get it from? Abai, who tried to explain it in one way based on some other stuff, but then we rejected it based on Rabbi Chanina. And then we had Rav Nachman's Perush, which Rav Yosef basically says is a good explanation, which goes back to the drashot on those psukim. Now we go to a question. So we asked Rav Sheshet the following question. Eved Ivri, hanimkar la'ovei kochavim, nig'al l'chatzaim, or eno nig'al l'chatzaim? In Eved Ivri, who's sold to a Gentile, can you redeem him partially? Okay, what would this mean? It would mean you pay half, let's say, and he only works half a week. Or eno nig'al l'chatzaim, or you can't do that. You can only do a complete redemption. Gu'ulato misteach huzah gama. Okay, we learn it from Gzera Shava, from steach huzah. Okay, the psukim here are Vayikra Kaf He Nun Aleph. You can look it up. I'm not going to share screen, but you can go back to the psukim. Imov Rabba Shanim. There's a lot of years left. Lefihen Yashiv Gu'ulato Mikesef Miknato. Okay, there it says Gu'ulato, and by Steach Huzah it says Ima'an Ish'ar B'Shanim Ad Shna Yovel V'Chishav Lo Kfi Shanav Yashiv Et Gu'ulato. So if there's a few years left, right? What do? You buy back the land. This is land I sold. You can buy back. And you pay based on how many years are left till the Yovel year would have gone back to you, because the Steach Huzah is something you inherited and it always stays in your possession. So now they say the following. What's the drasha? If you want to buy back your ancestral field, you cannot do it partially. You can't buy back part of the land. Now, why is that? Because it says matzah kedei ge'ulato. If you have enough money to redeem it, that must mean you have all the money to redeem it, and therefore you can't do it in parts. So that's one side to say, this is still the question, by the way. This isn't the answer. My mistake. This isn't the answer. They're going to say, do we learn it from this Gzera Shava? In which case, just like that is not nigal, this is also not b'chatzim. Or do we only say that to be lenient? We can make a Gzera Shava, but not to be strict. We're not going to put the stringencies of the Steach Huzah on. Okay, or some people say maybe we're rejecting the Gzera Shava altogether. Amrle, lava martatam nimkar kulo v'lo chetzio. Rav Sheshet says, doesn't it say there nimkar kulo v'lo chetzio? Hachanami nig'al kulo v'lo chetzio. So doesn't it say there that okay, this is something else. This is if you sell yourself to be a slave. Okay, if you sell, let's say I owe 1,000 shekels, and let's say slaves cost 500 shekels for 6 years. I can't sell myself to be a slave if I owe 1,000 and saving myself to slavery. Sorry, did I get it right? 1 second. Right. If I sold the opposite, if I stole 500 and selling myself to be a slave cost 1,000, I can't sell half of myself. It's only if I stole enough that's equal to the value of me being a slave. So since I can't get sold into slavery halfway, I also can't be, right? And we don't say, oh, you stole 500 and it's 1,000 shekel for a slave for 6 years, so you're only going to be sold 3 years. No, it doesn't work that way. So therefore, it would be assumed that redeeming wouldn't work halfway either. So Amar Abai says, what are you talking about? If you want to say you can be redeemed l'chatzaim, you could find chatzaim lekula and lechumra. What is this going to mean? Right now, we're going to explain. Lekula zavne b'mea yav lechamshim palga didami ve'eshbach bekama matayim. Okay, so now let's explain this. Let's say I was sold at 100, and then if nigal lechatzaim would work, okay, there could be a chumrah and a kula. How would it work with kula? Let's say I was sold for 100, and then I paid you back 50. So I paid you back half. Palga dedami, right? Ve'eshbach. And then the price went up before I finally was sold and completely. And now the price is 200. If we say it works, then the first half was done. And now the second half is half of 200, because now the price went up to 100, and I'd have to pay you 100. And I leave basically paying 50 for the first half, 100 for the second half. But if you say it doesn't work, right now, I would have to pay 150 now because I only paid 50 in the beginning. That 50 doesn't really count because it didn't work. And therefore, now it's worth 200. I have to pay 200. I'd have to pay altogether 200, so another 150. So they say, wait a minute, Abai, how could you possibly say that would work? Wait, but didn't we just say nitrabek kaspo? This goes against what we learned before. The Ev is always going to win. It's always going to be the lower price. So they say, well, it would be kigon to okir v'zava okir. The case where it would be lakula and there would be a nafkamina here would be where it was first worth 200, then it went down to 100. When I went to redeem myself the first time and I redeemed myself for half, I paid 50. Then it went up to 200 again. So then it would be because of Miknato, I would still owe 200. And then again, if Nigal Lachatzim would work, then the first half worked, and then I only have to pay 100. If not, I would have to pay the full value, the full 200. That would be Lakula, if Nigal Lachatzim would work. Mishkachala Lechumra, but it also could go Lechumra. He's just trying to explain what's the relevance of this question, if it works or not works. So now they say, Zavim b'matan yahiv mea. Let's say I was sold for 200 and then I gave 100, half the money. And then the price went down and went to 100. So if I say it works, I gave 50 in the beginning, where remember, it was originally 150. So I still owe 150. I'm sorry, I did the wrong thing. I was worth 200. Then I paid 100. That was half. So if that half, and then the price went down. So if that half worked, I only have to give another 50 because it's only 100 left. Because now it's only worth 100 and I only have to pay 50 because I already redeemed half of myself. Then the first 100 doesn't really count. It's as if I just gave you some money to watch for me. And therefore, right? I'd have to give that 100 to you, and then it would be enough. So if we say Nigala Chatza'im, I end up paying 150 altogether because I paid 50 for the first. And then, I paid 100 for the first and then 50 for the second. But if you say it doesn't work, then I have to pay, in the end, 150 altogether. So, I would have to pay only 100, my mistake. I'd have to only pay 100 because the price went down. So that would be L'chumra if we say it works. So that's the question. And now they say, we don't have an answer to this question. We don't have an answer to the question. Sorry, it's a very long daf. I'll try to get through this quickly. Now we're going to go to the next question. So not about Eved Ivri, but if I sold a house in a walled city. Now, if you sell in a walled city, you have a year to buy back. If you don't buy it back, you're done. You can't ever buy it back. In a steach huzah, an inheritance property, you can't buy it back for the first 2 years, otherwise nobody will ever buy land. This is all by Torah law. But after that, you buy it back based on how many years are left to the Yovel, because anyway, it's going to go back to you in the Yovel. The Batei Choman, the walled city, it will never go back to you if you sell it. So there's all different laws, and we're going to see them right now. So can you buy it back? Can you redeem part of it or not? Gulato misteach huzah gamar. Do we say, we learn it from there, masteach huzah, because also there it says gulato and there it says gulato, redeeming it. Masteach huzah inanegelet l'chatzaim, and just like that, you can't redeem halfway, because we saw matzah kadei gulato. Af hainami eno negal l'chatzaim. This also can't be. O dilma hechad gali. Or do we say, if they said so, matzah kadei gulato, you can't do it. That's where it said. Hechad lo gali, but where it didn't say it, and therefore you can't. So Amalemi Midrashosha Rabbi Shimon Nishma. Let's learn it from what Rabbi Shimon says. What does Rabbi Shimon say? What are we going to learn from him? Shalava v'go'el chatzim. He says you can do it. Okay, you can borrow money to redeem it, and you can also redeem it part way. Ditanya, how do we know? Because it says Im ga'ol yigal. Okay, this is a field that was sanctified. We're going to have 3 topics here. We have Steach Chuzah, we have Batei Choma. We know about the Steach Chuzah, it can't be L'Chatzaim. We're now going to learn from the Makdish, someone who sanctifies their field, what the law is. And from there, we're going to learn to the Beit Choma, in the walled city. Okay, so now he says, okay, sorry. All that can be done if you sanctify your field. And then from there, we're going to learn to the house. So the question is, why and how? What's the reason? Steach Chuzah has extra power, meaning because you're always going to get it back in the Yovel year if you don't buy it back. And therefore, now here comes the logic. If we're going to make something good for him, then we're going to make something worse for him. Since anyway it'll go back to you, we don't give you the opportunity to redeem it part way or to borrow money to redeem. But someone who sanctifies land, if it's, let's say, a Steach Chuzah, that generally goes back to you, it doesn't go back to you in the Jubilee year. So what's with a Steach Makdish? It ends up going, if you don't redeem it, it goes to the Kohanim in the Yovel. Therefore, okay, and therefore we're going to make it, since it's harder for you in the end, you won't get it back, we're going to make it easier for you to redeem. Same thing with the Batei Choma. If your year passes and you don't do anything, you'll never get it back again. And therefore, you can actually redeem it and redeem it partly. So the logic of Rabbi Shimon would say that just like if we're going to make it harder for you to get it back in the end, we're going to make it easier for you to get it back in the interim, and therefore we're going to allow you both to borrow and to pay back halfway. Okay, sorry I went way over time today. We're going to stop here. We didn't even finish, but we'll finish up on Sunday. And wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.